5 components. Good evening and welcome to our committee meeting for feeder alignment. And we have quite a bit that we need to discuss tonight, and we also need to start making some conclusions about what our recommendations would be and then how we're going to share that out with the board. And so last time we left off with a couple of requests from the committee, and we have provided the feeder alignment grade 5 enrollment. That's what you see right here, the 3-year trend in your packet. Also, we have provided you with maps of distances from schools, and I'm going to have Mr. Lesko in just a moment kind of go through these just to make sure that everyone is interpreting them the right way. And then, of course, we have backup information that we have supplied before. We just redo the packet so that you don't have to worry about bringing things back. And then that way you always have everything right at your fingertips. We also have the dual language program NWEA conditional growth percentile comparison so that you can see that. It follows the same format as the others. So that data is something that's there. And then the other is the past data that we've had with regard to the NWEA scores. And then we have additional information that's been added to the spreadsheets that Dan has provided. And I know that he put a transportation component in there, so we'll have him talk a little bit about that, and then we'll have some discussion. And anyone else that, I know Dorian, you had a couple of things that you wanted to talk about as well, but I think, we can all chime in. And so at this time, Mr. Lesko, if you will go over the transportation maps, please, just to make sure that we're all interpreting them the correct way.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So what those maps show you are where our current 5th graders live in the 4 magnet programs: ASH, dual language program at 50 North Lark, Montessori, and Toast. So you get a sense. We talked about the distance from each of the buildings, and obviously the magnet schools come from all over the city. So you get a sense of where a majority of the students who would be 6th graders next year live. Correct. I'm glad to answer any questions about that if you haven't.
Sorry, the arrows.
I'm sorry, the arrows depict the 3 schools.
There's a red arrow down toward the bottom, then there's a green arrow here next to the pink area, and then there's a blue large arrow right over here.
Those are the 3 middle schools.
Oh, there's, right. Okay. Red is which one? Just so I know.
Mine.
Red is mine. That should know be.
Green is Hackett and blue would be North Albany.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I wish we had them for every school.
Well, generally the schools have neighborhoods.
Right. But even there, I think it'd be fascinating to know where the within the zone, where the student's really living. This, Dan and I have been talking about this quite a lot. That talking about distances from school, from elementary school to middle school, is an easy data point. But the students don't live at the elementary school. And sometimes Dan is saying, well, but nobody lives up there in that corner. I'm like, well, this is close. He's like, yeah, but they actually live on the other, with a dense population is on the other side. But that would be, does that exist? I'm not sure we want to take the time or put on the topic, but I'm curious, if we said, oh, could we get a map of where the Giffen 5th graders actually live? Does that exist?
You would see that they live around Giffen.
Yeah,
Right. But they're probably not equally spread out. Maybe they are equally spread out, but I know they're not. They're not Giffen includes Center Square. I don't think there's Center Square kids going, or very few Center Square kids going to Giffen.
When you look at the catchment areas for the non-magnet schools, they're largely in that area.
Sure.
So that's why we looked at the magnets, because they do come from all over.
No, I do understand that. I guess a question about looking at this is what percentage, so if we look at Toast, for instance, and if you were to send Toast to North Albany, what percentage of kids attending from Toast would be eligible for transportation? Because this is what determines transportation, right?
Almost everybody who goes to North Albany is going to be able to take transportation, no matter what school they come from.
Yeah. And that's something, not to say that that question doesn't need to be asked, if you use Post for an example, but when I was taking a look at this, Post is actually the school with the least potential disruption for their original school. So, like, Post is never, if we're focusing on 24 to 28, Post is never considered for North Albany, so it's going to be Packet or Monterey if we stick with one of these scenarios. So then it's really a matter of the impact Post, and then it's really not that much of a, it's not that huge of a difference getting themselves to Myers. And then the other thing, when I was looking at it, I realized, which is understandable, but Montessori Magnet School, they're not going there, they're never, no matter where they go, no matter which middle school they go.
That's really useful, so I just printed copies before I left the house. You probably know this, you probably already know these, or have it in front of you, but I'm gonna have to do that, because I've been putting this out so much to actually sort of see. This came from Monmouth originally, this is at the elementary and the grade, and the stars show where the middle schools are. I just found it helpful as I was sort of thinking through, like, okay, so this school, these kids are here and then here to see those elementary zones.
Oh, okay.
So you had just said almost everybody who goes to North Albany would be eligible for busing. Is that because of distances?
Yeah.
It's just based on 1.5 miles, period.
The closest elementary school to North Albany is Arbor Hill, and that's a mile 3. So
Okay.
there are some kids who are in the, I guess I would say, the north and northeast side, maybe
That Arbor Hill
by
zone.
Arbor or that area.
Mhm.
They may be still 1.3-ish,
Mhm.
but most everybody else there is behind the school, Capitol Woods,
Yeah.
toward O'Neill. All of those students are going to be bus eligible.
That makes
And all the other students.
So if the governor signs the bill that Austin Peggy, I don't remember the bill number, and I should.
1925 and 3093.
About the safety, school safety, right? How is that going to interact with transportation for North Albany, Arbor Hill, North Albany?
The next step then would be, once it becomes a law,
Yeah.
then to translate that into the regulations. And in the child safety zone regulations, they assign point values to the various traffic concerns. You get 5 points for not having a sidewalk and 2 points for every 10 miles an hour over 35 or something, those kinds of things. So they would have to decide what point criteria they would be assigning to the new safety criteria. Vacant properties and crime rates are the two new things. We were talking about before the meeting began. The current law also includes, and this is how we began this process, right? If this becomes a law, this is why this became a law. Because of that corridor between Arbor Hill and North Albany Middle School. We were very concerned years ago when we started this transition about that walk for students in both directions. The current law includes the industrial character of a neighborhood, the industrial commercial character of neighborhood, which that whole stretch of North Pearl up until you get to Albany Shaker. Is that Albany Shaker Road? When it comes up the hill? Did you have to cross to get up to North Albany?
I think so.
Anyway, that's in the current law. It's not in the regs. So they never assigned any point value to that criteria. So that will have to be factored in as well. So once all those things are factored in, we'll see if we get enough points from, any parts of our community. Our hope obviously is that there will be large parts of our community that will be able to reimburse transportation for our students.
Well, in terms of the consideration for what that would mean for what we have to decide, it potentially increases the district's, like you said, the reimbursement for having to provide that transportation. So either way, the transportation is going to have to be provided potentially in all these situations. It's just the law will help offset the cost.
We'd be reimbursed.
And
We'd be
in favor
reimbursed.
of it.
79% of the.
That's-
It would also minimize, it would also include, the district would get reimbursed for students within the 1.5 miles.
Yeah.
Which is very
It's
important.
Well, and I guess just in looking at the bus distances
Yeah.
around And I think Dorian really gets all the credit for having added these and the whole transportation and zone,
Yeah.
that like, but if you look at the second page of it, it just shows like where every single school is from every other middle school. And you can just basically see, there are 2 combinations out of the 33 that are walkable, as I think of it. And then out of all 33, there's only 8 more that are between 1 mile and 1.5 miles. Everything else is gonna be bus. So like, I think the idea of like, how much busing are we providing? It's like, we're gonna be providing a lot of busing.
Anyway,
And then I think just like, on the practical pieces of like, we went through this all the criteria last time. So I mean, I think quickly you could say like, okay, the amount of change is important because it's just what the students and the parents are gonna have to go through, and you don't want that. And the class population is about school management and about class sizes and teachers and, the grade criteria was, look, there are gonna be teachers and students who are still in this school. And this is the amount of change they're gonna experience. That obviously our goal is to improve North Albany, but we don't wanna decrease the other 2 schools more than we have to, recognizing we have to, because that's how you average it all, right? So then, and then you add all this, so then after talking to Marina, I was curious about how close to the average we were actually building it. So that's what this now represents. These are different colors than the first sheet. And
you're
so,
the one who made this, right?
so this
is amazing, by the way.
so this represents like, okay, well, how'd we do? And it's like, well, honestly, they're all about the same, right? So I ended up thinking grades were gonna be important.
Like
And scores, I just don't think, I think they're the 2 least important pieces, honestly. So to me, the busing ends up actually really, really mattering, that you just look at it and you go, hey, Sheridan, when you look at this map, Sheridan is basically at the corner of Clinton and Henry Johnston. That's within 1.5 miles of Hackett. I don't think you should be walking the entire length of Lark Street in the winter. So I would say Sheridan really shouldn't go to Hackett. So to me, that knocks out 24 and 27. Similarly, New Scotland, it's like, well, New Scotland is on the corner of Main and New Scotland. So if you're on Whitehall, anything below Manning on Whitehall, you're walking, and anything below Main on New Scotland, you're walking. That's a lot of kids walking. So similarly, I don't think we should do 24 or 25.
So can we pause there, because I think that's a really interesting and juicy point that Dan and I have been sort of debating back and forth all week, because on the one hand, you could say, look at Myers, so Myers is the star number 1 on the map, and look at where New Scotland is, like, it's in Myers, it's in the New Scotland zone, there are students really around the school. You would say, well, I would sort of say, well, from a parent logic point of view, like, I live right here, there's a middle school here in my zone. That would be my first choice. I want my kids to go right there.
But if I'm not getting
But
busing,
then Dan is saying, actually, he's making the argument, it'd be better to bus them to a farther school, because then everybody's eligible for busing. You don't have kids who have to walk 1.3 miles. If we all know that it's too far for kids to walk through a city. So then, but then which I understand both arguments.
Yeah.
Where do we come down on
Well, I
like
think-
send your kids?
I don't know what's an argument. I think you could say, if my kids aren't getting a bus and they're expected to walk over 1 mile, which everybody who isn't Toast going to Hackett and Ash going to Myers, everybody else is expected to walk over 1 mile, I'm going to drive my kids or it's bad.
But let's.
But
take
like,
that
it's not a
question on
debate, like the kids, they have to go 1 mile, like they have to go that distance. And someone's gonna take them, and if it's not a bus, it's either their own feet or it's their parents, like those are the only.
Sure.
So like in that way, I would similarly say, I don't think Giffen should be assigned to Hackett, that I know people live in Center Square and they can absolutely walk to Hackett and that's a great walk and it's easy and it's flat and that's great. But like anyone who lives by Giffen has to walk 1 mile uphill on Morton.
But like I told
So,
you.
like,
Although, and I'm not disputing what you're saying, but I think anyone who's at Giffen has to travel to any school.
But if you go to either of the others, they get a bus. So
Oh.
it's whether they have to walk. So to me, it's about avoiding the pink squares. Those are terrible walks and they're not gonna get any help from the state law. The state law, I think, helps Arbor Hill. I think Arbor Hill will be solid. Like, I think that's an industrial area. I think Arbor Hill will be fine. But like the other 3, you're not gonna get an industrial area named in the middle of New Scotland.
Presumably, and this is presumably, right, if the law is passed and when it goes in effect, because of the hiring of the bigger reimbursement, the district may have more funds to spend on providing bus that is below the 1.5. But students are within the 1.5 miles, right? Because it's not that you're not allowed to do that, it's just the state is not gonna give you any money for it.
All right, yeah, but I guess I'm just saying, if you get rid of 24 because of New Scotland and Sheridan, and then you get rid of 25 because of New Scotland, and then you get rid of 26 because Giffen shouldn't walk up the hill, and you get rid of 27 because Sheridan shouldn't walk that. 28 buses, every single person who has their school changed. The only people not receiving busing are getting the exact same thing they got this year, so they're probably not gonna get that upset about it. And everybody else is taken care of and it's paid for by the state. It's not us shuffling money. If we can shuffle money, if the state brings us more money, we should spend it on activities, not, so like, I think 28 makes the state pay the freight. And then when you get, because all the grades are about the same, like all the population's about the same, and all the dispersals, like, well, you're gonna change 5 or 6 schools, they're all about the same. So like, it's hard.
I didn't look at it from the logic that you're saying, and I know it kind of makes it like, that makes it part of the challenge of how they can look at it, but what I did is, because we talked about like, what are the strengths, we said, let's look into the scenarios and think about what are the strengths, what are the gaps of each of them. And I'll tell you right now, and I can give you the reason, 28 became my last choice, interestingly enough, even when considering transportation, because first I looked at, like, the population has happened close to 700, because we said population, performance, amount of change, the whole magnitude breakdown, transportation, and then I started looking at like specialized needs, diversity, parent involvement, potential, anecdotal understanding of things like parent involvement and special needs. So for population, it puts Hackett close to 700 for 28. Mixed, it's like some mixed scores, not enough to make that a difference. There would be, in terms of changes, everybody experiences about 5 or 6 changes in school, so that I wasn't worried about that. I did look at the busing. I did filter out the fact that there were some schools that were going to have busing no matter where they went, so I looked at what's the significant changes for that. And then I looked at how many of the more, again, anecdotally, more challenging schools will end up in each, the way it would work out. And so when I started looking at like some of the more challenging schools, the magnet school breakdown, again, anecdotal understanding of parent involvement and diversity and socioeconomic status, 28 provides the biggest imbalance, especially if you look at the number of schools, like if you look at North Albany in 28, you have Giffen, New Scotland, and Schuyler in the same school.
Right.
Then you have Ardenville, Ash, Montessori Magnet, and Sheridan. And then you have DCS, Eagle Point, Pine Hills, and Toast. Not terrible, but compared to others, I would consider those better.
I guess if you look at the grades, like the coloring all aside, because but like 28 is the one that gets the English scores closest. So like it's, when the math scores are up. So if I were doing it on grades, like before I did the bus piece, I said 26 is the best, right? Because like I thought 26, it's like, well, can you pull up the first sheet for a second? Is it possible? Like, I'll go the other tab, the first tab. Yeah. If you go down, like, 26, ultimately, when I look at the grades, if that's talking about what it does to the school, that coloring, and like, to me, it's like, well, let's do as little, as little negative to harm to Myers and Hackett as we can. And so like, in that way, I think 24 is out because it is 3 pink squares. I think 25 is out because I think improving a school, I'm sorry, go back up. I think improving a school, improving Myers or Hackett isn't the goal, and improving it by 5 points over 25 shows that you took it out of Myers. Like you shouldn't do that. And so similarly, I would take out 27 because it's 3 negative hits on a school. So I think 26 by like grades is probably the best one. It has the most green, which is the most improvement. And so like, in that way, like on grades alone, so that's really, to me, where the question's at, like on grades alone, I think 26, it's like, so it does the most good and it does the least harm, cool. But like, when you factor in busing, I don't know. So like, to me, busing, it's like, if you can get the kid to go to Giffen, bus up the hill, cool. Like, I lived in Mansion, like walking up Morton's, that's a tough hill.
But I mean, my kid walks from Mansion to Hackett. You know,
But they're not walking up
But
all of
interestingly,
Morton from the bottom.
I plugged in Giffen to Hackett in Google Maps, walking. It says it's a 24-minute walk, and it actually says you cut through the park. It doesn't say walk all the way up Morton, like that adds time, but then you're given two sides of a triangle.
The park is-
Yeah, there is also a question.
But it's all dug up, you can't walk in that for 2 years, years and years.
Our roads are still open.
How does the district calculate, whether a student is eligible for busing? Because, I mean, it all really depends on the student's address, right? It's not about the school.
It's not about the school, but
It's
where within
specifically
the.
about the student's address. So is it, I don't actually know how, the way I would do it is I would plug it into Google Maps, like follow the road, not the actual, right, not the, not.
So you're talking about the distance to the school?
Yeah.
Just based on where they live, and then you're looking at whether it's more than a mile and a half from
Driving?
that location.
Like,
But it's not so much, isn't it?
But from Giffen, the first place you could ever cut in is Eagle, and you could try and cut across the park there, and the steepest part of the hill is below that. So like, that's just not, like, walking from where you live, which is basically equivalent to Eagle, I think you've gotten most of the grade out of the way. Like, I just, if you live by Giffen Elementary School, that is an awful, awful walk.
But I think this is an important question for the group is, do we want to, Dan's proposing intentionally crisscross the students across the city.
To give everyone state
To give everyone
funding.
buses. Where I started out with, like, I sort of created a set where I said, okay, what would the parent logic middle school be? If you just said to parents, your kid goes to this element, this is your zone, what would be the logical place you think your kid would go to middle school if you lived here and you didn't know anything? And then sort of created, and then it generates a very different set of conclusions. But I understand the concerns about.
We built purely geographical, and it's not a workable,
Exactly.
like, so.
You can't do just a post-neighborhood school.
And it's also a different consideration. If you are a family that has a car and has the capacity to drive somebody, honestly, busing is not really a consideration if you have that ability, you have that capacity. If not, then busing is definitely a consideration. So, that's.
Yeah, and I know, I lived 1.4 miles from the school and they gave us busing for a few years and then they said, we're gonna get much stricter now, and we lost it, so I sort of experienced both, and I knew my elementary kid couldn't, my second grader couldn't walk 1.4 miles through the city, like, you're right, it's not realistic.
Well, we weren't
Crossing
we were gonna get
major
buses
streets
because when we looked in Google Maps, one path gave us 1.3 and one path gave us, 1.6.
Yeah.
1.5.
Yeah,
And we're like, well, we don't know which one the district is gonna use, and we get busing.
interesting.
And we go to.
It shows on your side.
Scotland was our homeschool, we're off of Hackett, but
Yeah.
Scotland was our homeschool, and we did get busing, we weren't sure, we weren't
Yeah.
right on that test, but interestingly enough, so Myers used to be a magnet school, it's not anymore, but we were looking for a house, we purposely bought a house because it was less than half a mile from a magnet school, so we got Myers for our oldest. So we knew because we went like that school, so yeah, we know that we're less than half a mile from Myers. But by the time our younger ones that were in middle school, going to Myers wasn't an option because of the theater school. So we're like, well, we'll just go to Myers before we have them walk potentially to Hackett.
Sure.
But it all worked out, but, I've seen a piece about the transportation, but we gotta look at with the transportation. There are those other factors that I think sometimes it's not, I think putting a school anywhere close to 700 is risky in itself too. And is there any scenario that puts a particular middle school,
And it's
not that it has to rule
67, right?
for 28,
20, I think after this.
28, like,
Yeah, there's one that is under 600 and one that is 67.
it's 67. So not at 700, but puts it close. Yeah, there's a couple that puts it close.
But I sort of wonder if this question about if this busing question and how to think about it is one where we need guidance from administration, or is that just up to us to decide what is our value system? What do we believe?
So one of the things that we've looked at is, so we started with the big overview, and it's exactly where it needs to be. We can answer questions, we're here to talk things out, but really and truly, we want this to be the true work of the committee and what those recommendations are, with our support, of course. And so at this juncture, you have 5 scenarios that we talked about last time. If you wanted to have some, your rationale for each of the scenarios, and we share all 5 of them with the board and get input from the board, and we can talk it through with the board just like you have here, and then they can give feedback, and then maybe at that point, it would be, let's look at maybe 3 recommendations. And then those 3 recommendations go forward, because ultimately, by the time it gets down to 3 recommendations, then the board is going to end up making a recommendation or accepting a recommendation from the group. I do believe it is important for the board to hear, not only have they, they've been listening and paying attention, but it's very different than when you're on the board floor, you have your presentation, and you're explaining each of the scenarios with the pros and the cons. And then, of course, which of the 5 do you feel, or of the 3, if you narrow it down to 3, do you feel would be the most beneficial for our students?
I guess just one way to maybe do a decision on it is if you bring it up. I mean, to me, it's very difficult to pick the best one. It's very difficult to pick the second best one. But I think when you look at it, you can usually say, well, out of these 5, here are the 3 I like the least. Not that they're bad, but just like what I like the least, right? So if you do that for these, I would say for, dispersion, it's the same thing. They have 5 or 6 changes. It's all going to be the same. It's a wash. Population, I know some of these are in the pink, but like it's not possible to really balance the population harder than that and not get the grades wildly out of whack, So like, I think that you could say, I guess, 24, 27, and 28 are the lowest, but really they're kind of a wash. If you're looking at the bottom 3 for the original grades, I'd say, I'm sorry, go up for a second. Yeah. So from there, I'd just say, okay, well, 24, 25, and 27 are the lowest because they have the most negative impact. And then like you go to the next sheet, and so like, to me, the ones that are left out are always going to be 26 and 28. Like they're in the bottom 3 the least. So in that way, like 26 and 28, like they improve the schools, they balance it out, and I don't think they do it as much as at the expense. Like 24 and 25 take a big chunk out of other schools, and like 25 takes such a big chunk out of Myers. It improves Hackett 5 points. So like,
I like hearing from people who haven't been speaking as much.
Yeah.
But I'll choose one first, and then okay, do you want to go next? Because I've got a bunch of things.
Well, I looked at everything and I said, if it has a if the grades are greater than 10, no.
The difference between,
Yes.
what's the
And
difference?
so of 28 and 26, 28, I look at the math score, 9.55.
no, wait, but that's a different one. That's the one I just an alternate.
And what's the new one?
That's the one that she did with duals, whatever.
All
That's
right, 28. 13.17, 24.9, that's greater than 10. English is easy to get together. 26, that's still out of range too. The one I saw that worked for me was 13, 16, and 20.
But they all don't. I mean, 13.
13, 16, and 20.
13 changes almost every school in the
No,
district.
changes 3.
What do you mean?
The original paperwork that you sent out was 3.
Oh, so let me just see this one you're showing.
Yeah, that's odd, why is their look different than what I'm, but they're widely different.
As in, they're not, one school is a small school and the other two are big schools.
Well, I thought we ruled out the other scenarios because of the impact on the
Yeah.
population.
When I ruled out the
I don't
two looking at grades first.
No.
13. I looked at grades first, and then I looked at population. If it was greater than 700, no. I agree, 13.
Oh, I think
Close to 700. I had to like say, it's very difficult to say yes and no. I mean, there are certain situations.
I think 13 might have gotten moved to
Yeah,
18 just because they
The
all,
headings are a little,
like, 13 is now 18, but they're all it's just too much change.
Right.
But I don't,
Yeah, the old 20, only 3 schools stayed the same.
trying to think I guess 12 is the 3 schools?
yeah.
So that just,
Yep.
I don't know, go down, I don't know what was wrong with that. It creates wildly population.
Oh, yeah, I agree. Yeah, that was my one issue because it was.
So like I viewed there as being like some red line things where it's like, yep, the thing is dead. Like if your school's over 700 people, you're dead. Like it's not, you can have it 600 something, like we gotta make it work.
And that's how we got to 24 through
Yeah.
28.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then some of those are really, just like 28, the math scores were out of range.
But the reason the math scores ultimately are out of range is because New Scotland is weirdly kind of imbalanced. Like every other school is a little bit more balanced. Like, so New Scotland has like in the 50s or 60s, if you go down, you can see their scores and they're in like the 20s for math. I'm not sure if that was just a weird year of data.
And that's why it would have been good to have, if we didn't get to put this latest data in there.
That's a growth spurt, it's not that useful.
Yeah.
If all we cared about was the test scores, I thought the 27 was the closest. I did some averaging and adding together, and I thought that was the one that, I'm not as worried. I'm not as worried about the idea that somehow we're gonna harm the test scores of Myers or Hackett. Like, I personally would be like, I don't care, like, yes, as you said, like, it'd be great not to bring anybody down, but in order to balance, there's gonna be some that go a little lower, some that go higher.
Yes.
So to me, I'm not, yes, Myers and Hackett are gonna have lower overall test scores. I'm sorry that's gonna happen, but that's just part of the process of balancing. So to me, if all we cared about, and it's not all I care about at all, but if all I cared about was getting the test scores close, I thought that 27, if we average it all together, came up with schools that seemed the most balanced.
And in some ways, 27 is like great for the students because it's like, it doesn't have anything that's way below average. Like there's no dark red squares, right? And there's 2 high above average squares. And so, like, 27 is the most positive, I guess, on grades.
So when it comes to the busing situation, I took a bike when I was in elementary school. And I live quite a distance. This is in New Jersey, right by the Philadelphia border. I have no problem with it. I'm on. Sorry.
But asking them to bike from Sheridan to Hackett, it's,
But I had a problem. And then like a mile and a half.
They have, now granted, it's not really your address, but when I look at this, there's a strong potential, and that's what I thought about sharing. They're gonna need a bus regardless of almost every scenario. Almost. I realize it's not every. But they don't need it for 24. And if we're only looking at distance to school, so I realize that's not.
Same thing,
a
right?
full-
I agree with you. I think
That's not a
it's
full
all care about
accuracy, but if we're talking about neighborhood schools, people who fit the Sheridan neighborhood schools, 24 and 27 are the only ones that have them potentially walking. Everything else is gonna end up, needing a bus regardless. And with the scores, so here's how I look at the scores, because we obviously don't want to bring down, we talked about we don't want to bring down any school, but some of these, for any of these situations, some of them you can prepare for and get the supports in place. If the school district knows that, I'm just picking this scenario, 25 is going to have this score impact potentially based on the numbers, they can be prepared for that. They can consider what kind of programming and resources, and the principals and the teachers, they can just know that's coming. But there's all these other factors that you can't necessarily, you're not gonna like suddenly prepare to move families to another house so they don't have to deal with transportation, or to change what the culture is like coming from those schools from a socioeconomic or cultural or racial. I know we can't use race solely as.
So do you want people, like, not, I guess, in an optimal world, so would 26 be really good, like, you want everyone walking? Or just practically, like, what do we want?
When I consider that, when I looked at it, I felt like there were enough pros and cons transportation-wise for most of the scenarios, that there are ones that I ruled out I ruled out a couple in terms of where they fall in my spectrum, because even when controlling for transportation and considering other issues, the transportation piece became least important, at least when I consider the other issues.
Within
Which
that,
I realize is just like my.
I guess, I think walking and biking and all that stuff is kind of, you know, fun, but I just think it's like, it's Albany, it's winter, that's like, I guess in New Jersey, I grew up on downstate too, like that you can bike every day in a way you can't up here. And I think like ultimately, to me, it's a really like, Giffen can't go to Hackett, they'd have to walk up Morton. Like we can talk about grades, we can talk about a ton of stuff, but it's like, okay, well, is there another solution? Can we say we'll get them a bus? Because it just seems really like cold to be like, the kids suck it up. So like, I don't know. So in the same way, like, you know, New Scotland, I just think you're gonna end up with like hundreds of cars trying to drop kids off. That's a big, logistical to do. Like, I just think pushing the kids onto buses, like, you send New Scotland to Myers, you're gonna try and deal with 400 cars a morning. Like, that's a crazy thing to try and do.
but I'm confused because New Scotland is right there next to me. So aren't there just some kids living?
No,
Well,
they live there, and so anyone below Manning on Whitehall, and anyone below Maine on New Scotland, and anyone in that
I mean,
curve.
that's why I said it's interesting to see the population, you know, within that New Scotland zone, which is a big zone. It would just be interesting to see.
Yeah, but you can look at,
Where they actually,
it's
where
like,
they live.
it's everything to, I think this is supposed to be Manning, so it's like this entire zone here in a circle. So like this little piece, I think, would be bus, and I think like this piece would be bus. But like, it's a big,
Yeah, I mean, I guess when I look at all the little streets around New Scotland, they don't look like, they don't, my impression of those streets is it's not a horrible walk.
it's not a horrible walk, but it's over a mile.
Well, my educated guess, and I don't even know if educated guess is total guess. The number of people who are gonna have to figure out how to get their kids to Myers because they're not eligible for a bus is not gonna be much different than the number of us who can figure out how to get ourselves.
But everyone will get a bus. Like, I guess,
Not everybody will get a bus to have it necessarily. Not everybody gets a bus to have it. There are people who get a bus to have it, but it might, you know, like maybe, like I won't get, none of my kids are in elementary school anymore, but I won't get a bus to Myers anymore, but he would start getting a bus to Myers because it's almost like we swap. So the individual inconvenience matters, but I think number-wise, switching New Scotland from Myers to Hackett, you know, I'm totally going on there because we have no foundation for that, or no data, but I feel like if you look at the way it fills out, having to bus kids to New Scotland versus, having the bus kids, I don't see it being like a huge difference.
Between New Scotland and Hackett.
Like between,
I'm sorry, between Myers and Hackett,
Myers
before
and
New
Hackett.
Scotland.
There might be a huge difference for individual families.
it would be a huge difference for about half a family. Picture where New Scotland is. Anyone who lives south of that, it was further from Hackett, they automatically get a bus. So everyone who lives on Whitehall and anyone who lives between Whitehall and New Scotland gets a bus.
Well,
And so, and then like, but the other
when
way,
you say south,
like toward
my home.
Whitehall. So like right now, anyone who lives anywhere in the New Scotland catchment area that I would say is more toward Whitehall than the school itself gets a bus. But if you sent them to Myers, anyone who lived in that, who wasn't out by the golf course and who wasn't like, you know, in this little piece here, would be within a mile and a half surface. So like Hackett and Myers, just because of where they are, like Hackett would soak up. Everyone would need a bus because almost everybody's, like the school itself's a mile and a quarter. So like anyone who lives further west and anyone who lives further south, which is like most of that neighborhood, would get a bus to Hackett, and they do currently. But like if you stuck them at Myers, they'd all have to walk.
So there is the
Well, go ahead.
there is the other consideration as well, right? And I think that transportation is a huge issue, but we also have to think about how much time will these students spend on the bus, right? Already, they spend a lot of time, right? And I totally see I lean towards offering transportation to everyone, like making it so that everybody's eligible. I'm wondering whether that's going to put kids on the bus for longer than 45 minutes to an hour, right? Right now, from where I live, off of Western Avenue to Myers is like 40 minutes on a good day. On the bus, on the so
I did look at that because this rate, the color, which again, the colors talk about 1.5 miles, over 1.5 miles. It's in the red, pink, and the white, basically.
Yeah.
When I looked at the numbers, I did not really so much math, but I looked at how many, so like 24 has 3 schools within 3 miles, 3 schools within 2-ish miles, and only 1 school over 3 miles. So I broke that down. And there's a bunch of schools. I mean, some of these scenarios, many of these scenarios will have kids on buses for a long time.
But if you look at this first column is what we currently have. And so like if you look at them, like 27, which I think provides a lot of busing and is good. The only one that really has a good deal more busing is Arbor Hill. And Ash, that those two, but everyone else, it's like, well, Eagle Point has the same 3.1, Giffen has the same 2.9. So it's like 1 or 2 schools will have a little bit more, but like overall, everybody's gonna be on the bus no matter what, because the middle schools are just far. So like we can say we don't like the amount of busing now, but that's just like the amount of busing to get children to middle school. Like it's not gonna change all that much one way or the other in an aggregate or not, right? Because there's just not.
I'm not crazy about having a community, and you live in that community, you're proud of that community, and now suddenly the school that you live next to is not part of your community.
If we're trying to average the school sizes, and we're trying to average the performance, and we're trying to bring.
We want to have pride in these kids, and these kids want to be familiar with going to school on the weekends and play basketball on the courts. Have fun.
We can do that at our elementary schools, but there's only 3 middle schools and they're far away. I just think like we should build a school community, like teachers and principals, and we should have a community. I just think it's like, this is not.
I like going to my school in the summertime and the wintertime, having fun there.
So as an experiment, because Dan and I spent some time being like, how do you think through distances and busing? And so I sort of said, okay, what if, I mentioned it, the idea of sort of the parent logic. Where it's like, okay, I live in, my kid goes to Arbor Hill, I live in Arbor Hill, where would I think that my kid should go to middle school? And sort of wrote down, okay, I probably think my kid should go to North Albany or Hackett, because that my zone is somewhere between those schools. And maybe if I live on the northeastern side, I think one thing, if I live in the western, I'll find the other thing. And I went through my list, and some schools, like Eagle Point, I said, I'm not sure there's a logical middle school, and I'm actually curious what the answer would be. And I think we could choose to have that conversation, like what do we believe the parent logic would be, and then does that work? And I think Dan would say, you created a mess, because now you have to have kids walk really far.
I don't think there is parent logic. It's either your kids walk, or your kids bus, or the kids you have to drive. Like the only parent logic is like, what does it mean to me and my kids, right? Like, to know that my kids go to a school that's 2 miles instead of 5 miles.
But then day one, you come in saying, I live really close to Myers, I want my kid to go to Myers, I chose that healthy.
Sure.
I mean, this is like.
But that's not the logic of it, that's just like, well, cool, but I built the thing, like I tried putting Myers everywhere else, and I couldn't really do it. Like, I mean, it's just like everything.
When I hear the fun blessing, I think, well, what time are they gonna get home? What time are they gonna have a snack? What time are they gonna start their homework? What time are they gonna be able to do, be comfortable? What are they gonna do on the bus while they're waiting? What's gonna happen in a snowstorm? Obviously, we can't avoid the fact that kids are busing, but I don't like the idea of kids sitting, I mean, I already see people are like, the bus is.
My kids go 4.2 miles from Montessori to my house, a block from Myers, every single day. It's the furthest distance on all of this. It's a perfectly reasonable bus trip. Like, traveling is terrible, commuting isn't great. If you could do this without changing a single school and without moving anyone, like, I just think it's like, this is all about trade-offs in that way, that like,
I just wondered, that's a fact. 15 minutes alone. Alone. She's on it alone. There's one other kid in my neighborhood that goes to Hackett, and he's on the bus only sometimes in the morning. So she's on that bus for 15 minutes waiting for the next bus. And sometimes that CDTA bus doesn't show up until 30 minutes late.
Yeah.
And then it turns off on the CDTA map. And I don't know where the heck she is. And so I have to call up and complain.
Yeah.
Yeah, who knows where that bus is now? It's not tracked.
well, I guess, what does everyone think of 27? Like, it does have like the most even grades, and an average wise, it's like closer and better, and it does provide busing to almost everyone, and it changes, like not a terrible amount of schools. It has 675, I'd say is like its big drawback. But like, in kind of trying to stack them up, like, I think I agree with Dorian, like 27's my favorite if I don't have to worry about Sheridan, I guess, but.
So I have a recommendation, because I think that we can talk this to death. And I think that we should choose, I would be okay with the 5, but we can also choose the 3 that we like the best for whatever reason, and send it to the board. And my recommendation would be to not just send it to the board, but also create a community survey that would give us the parent logic, because the 5 of us here, yeah, we represent kids from different schools, but I don't know that we are, and that we can speak for the entire Albany City District community of parents.
And not all of us are still at the school that we were originally. I'm not saying there's a criticism,
Right.
but not all of us are still in the
I think that makes
school
sense.
that was the school that we were in when we were selected.
Right, yeah, right. And I think the thing that makes us least representative is that I think we all, and we have the ability to drive our kid if we want to or need to, at least some of the time. And I think that question of what is it like to not have a car and to have your kid need to walk 1.3 miles or bike 1.3 miles or go a distance that doesn't feel safe to you as a parent, even if it doesn't qualify as being dangerous. That's a tough, I empathize, I sympathize.
I'm still looking for some forum for the parents to get.
Would you rather have your kid at the closest middle school, which is 1.3 miles away, or would you rather be like, heck, bus them across the city because at least there's a bus?
I
And
can
would
see,
you go, I hate the buses.
I can see having parents vote on it, but like, input is always gonna be, I don't want my school to change, I want my school to be better, I want their school to be worse, I want averages without having to do the math. It's like, they just, what do you want? Like, I think you should vote, that's fine.
Well, that's why I wouldn't say that the community survey should be, which one of these plans do you prefer? I think it actually should be, what are you looking for in the middle school?
Yeah.
What are the 5 most important things to
Yeah.
you? And
What do
then
you
from
value?
there, the board needs to make a decision with the administration about based on these recommendations that we made. Like all the work that the 2 of you have done here and the district has done here, I don't think it should go to waste. I think based on this, we should make the recommendation and see how they interface with what the community, what parents in the community actually feel is important to them. Because, I'm sorry I keep bringing this up, but I think that programming and administration in each school are are really important, leadership in each school are really, really important parts of making decisions about where you send your kid to school, or what are important things, because that's how schools are run, there's an important role in how well students learn, right? So, and we're not even touching that here, and I'm not saying we should, but it's one of the considerations. So.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
We're all picked to represent the elementary school our children are going to or went to.
Or the middle school.
Or middle school, okay. How many people here have heard from the other parents of that school? I'm just curious. I have not.
Not
I've
one.
asked for it. I'm looking at the camera. But I have not. I've heard from it from one other mother, maybe two, but not really officially. And I'm just curious, what's the other parent out there
I
thinking?
haven't yet, because I've been wanting to know what I'm gonna, I needed my own guidance,
Okay.
on what I'm gonna ask. I'm
So-
prepared to ask.
If I can
Yeah.
do the process part. So once, let's say, the scenarios are determined that these are the things, it's a combination of what everyone is saying here. Looking at what are the slides that we would be able to put together, the scenario, the pros, the cons, the logic behind it. So really, scenario, logic behind it, then the pros and the cons. And we can help develop those slides. And that way you have those talking points with regard to each of those scenarios. And then taking that on your quote roadshow,
Yeah.
with district help. I mean, it's not like it's just like go live long and prosper. No, there would be district assistance, like we would go to the meetings with you and then you can share out the information, you can get the pros and cons, you can see what the feedback is. Good suggestion with regard to, what are the 5 most important things with regard to feeder alignment? What is it that you look for as a parent? What are your concerns? And then, which of these most aligns with what we're hearing from the survey to the parents is a great idea, doesn't take the place of the face-to-face or Zoom, doesn't take the place of that, but it only adds to that, because we can push out a district-wide survey where we get those, top priorities that parents are looking for. And then you have the prepared material that we work on, and then you share that, and then we're with you, and you share that information out, and then we get the feedback. And then parents have that feedback, we have both the face-to-face as well as the survey data, then that's something that we share with the board in its totality, in that if there are 12 parent forums that are held, then here's the input that we've been able to put together based on scenario 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5.
I also would like to add, so we built North Albany, it looks great. And now we're gonna ship other students into it from that, out, and the kids in that neighborhood don't get to use that beautiful school that they had built.
But you have to understand that has always been temporary with regard to this committee.
Right.
And that has always been temporary from the beginning, looking at what that feeder alignment would be since its inception.
The viewpoint from that neighborhood is not gonna be thinking of it that way.
But that's still part of the input that happens.
Yeah.
It's still part of the input but here's, if you think about it, that's gonna be true for any community, whether it's a new school or not.
It's, that's gonna be a bad point in that neighborhood.
But I'm not gonna, I can't speak for that school, that neighborhood, because I don't live in that neighborhood, but it does, I'm just trying to, some potentially put myself in the issue. They're in a school that has a reputation in some stores right now that aren't so well. Maybe I'm a parent who's gonna say, yeah, let me go to the highest school.
They might.
Let my kid go to the highest school. I don't care that it's new. I don't care if it's brand new. I wanna go to the school that's gonna give my kid, the ability to be A, B, and C. Like we won't know what the parents' values are outside of this room until we serve it.
Right, but that could happen, but it might not.
It might.
And that's what I don't want to
have
happen.
a survey.
Although it's been a long-standing decision in the school district and the community, and it's been, for as long as I've lived here, and for as long as I've been engaged with the district and all of these committees, it's been decision to have a feeder pattern for middle schools,
Mhm.
right? So it doesn't matter if you're in the neighborhood, because if you go to school, for instance, Montessori, like you choose to go to Montessori or you choose to go to Eagle Point, there is no middle school that is optional for you, like, that's in your neighborhood. So it's, we, meaning the Albany district community, committed to having a feeder pattern for middle schools. And I don't think that's gonna change, just like we committed to having middle schools that are 6th grade, right? So, and everybody comes together in the high school. So I definitely hear and acknowledge the point that it's a beautiful school in a neighborhood of Albany that not many people know about, actually. And it's quite hidden and it's a beautiful neighborhood but I also don't know how many students, how many kids are there that are looking at that as their neighborhood school, right? I don't know if that's the perception. So,
But I think that's where you get the balance of not only sending out the survey, but that's where when we talked about going back to the communities and getting the input from families and having the family, having the parents with the forums where they have that opportunity to give feedback in a face-to-face, or if it has to be a Zoom or any combination thereof, we can develop what that format looks like for the parent forums.
They might have values we're not even thinking.
Say that one more time.
Families might have values that we're not even thinking of.
Correct.
In this room.
Absolutely.
We know how many people are listening on this?
3.
I know 2 people who are not, no, I mean, like, that are listening and can't communicate. Do we know how many people there are?
No, we usually get a summary at the end and we can see that, but like right now, we have 3.
Okay.
And then we do post them so that we can, people can listen to it. But the biggest piece is going to be, as we started this saying, when we go out and you're meeting with families, if it's with the PTA meetings, if it's a different type of forum, we will set that up so that we can get the input of our families.
All right, so we're gonna recommend to the board, and then the board gonna go out and discuss this.
The board is not gonna go out and discuss this.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm curious if those of us around the table and then sort of work in advance for this meeting. Do we each have full name who would personally eliminate? I'm just wondering, are there anyone?
Say that one more time, do you?
I wonder if there are anyone.
Everyone name the bottom 2.
That we all, like, do we have can we each name our bottom 1 or 2?
I have a bottom.
I'm curious if they're the same ones, they probably won't be, but it'd be nice if we could eliminate ones that we all actually came to the same conclusion. What's your bottom one?
My bottom one is 28.
28.
They're buried.
My bottom one was 27.
Really?
I have bottom one too. I don't want to rule out 27,
Okay.
but I did do my ABC, and 27 is my B. So it is, 27 is my bottom 2, but I would not want to rule out the 27.
Okay. And what's your bottom one? 24. 24. Where's the look?
So 28 has to.
So we're not.
Are we missing anyone?
That's funny, and Dan and I both put 28 as our top, so. Which one? 28.
I think it depends which sheet you're looking at. Like, this sheet makes them look like it's just there are 2 different things going on so much, so like.
I put a lot of it, I'm owning my own perception, but I got the 28 based on, I started looking at some like cultural reputation, what I imagine the impact it would have on the school, what I imagine that experience.
So what's everyone think of 26?
26 is my B.
Yeah, solid middle.
Population is great, math scores, it's a little wide. I don't know if North Albany's grades increased that much more. Myers increases, Hackett's slight decrease.
Yeah, I'm not, I'm totally.
Maybe even the population.
I guess, but does the busing pose a problem?
For,
For 26, it has Giffen walking up the hill, and it has, that's really its problem. It has Giffen walking up the hill.
I mean, that should probably go on the cons column in the presentation, right? Like, I think
that would be a con, yeah.
that would totally be a
Well-
con.
But is there anything that's chopped
And if the
down?
law is satisfied, then.
I think Arbor Hill would be kept, like, because it's industrial, but like, would Morton ever be able to be part of that law? If it would, I think that's a totally different consideration, because that's why I'm not knocking out the first three, because Arbor Hill, I'm like, well, Arbor Hill's gonna be good under that.
Because they're doing that, they're doing really good park stuff.
Yeah.
And there's a lot happening over there right now, and that's what, like a 2-3 year project.
Okay, so I mean, that's a good,
So, and
I don't-
Mr. Lesko, correct me if I'm wrong, it would be impacted by the law, because of, especially with the example that we used in the story, that walking up Morton, that would be something that would be addressed in the law.
Theoretically. It would
Theoretically.
depend on again, it would depend, it's gonna depend, all of this is gonna depend on the point criteria
Mhm.
that the state education department assigns to the new criteria, if it's just technical law.
Yeah, these points are
But
like,
isn't scenario 26 would be the only one? Well, the other thing is, if I think of Giffen coming up Morton, is, there's the construction, there's the court and the police station over there. And, I mean, I guess those would be, I mean, I don't know enough about the law to know what kind of things would be considered. I don't know what the crime rate or risk is over there, but it's not, I work the bottom of it. It's not it's not a low key area. And it's a very high traffic,
Okay. so
commuting. It's a very high traffic commuting.
I lived right there, she
Yeah.
lives there. So not to make everyone's life complicated, so I did add a sheet, Dorian and I were talking about dual can be broken out. Like, in a math way, it doesn't really matter because dual and DCS, at least the grades we have, are like within a couple percentage points of district average itself. So like, when you add it to any school, it doesn't really do like math wise all that much, but like, it does let you build some more schools. So, I mean, I think 31 is halfway decent just because there's even less movement. You know, that the amount of change required in 31 is a lot less. But it splits dual and DCS and it just starts that already. Like, are we ready for that? Can we do that? Like, should dual and DCS still be on, you know?
I'm sorry, say that one more time, should they be?
Like, should they be together, like, because
Okay.
this starts breaking them apart. It starts saying, hey, you know, like, let's do this as DCS is now a 40-person school and dual is a 20-person school. And it gives you a little more play. It actually really just doesn't help with the grades that much because like, they're both just so close to the
But
average.
with the numbers.
Yeah, the grade number, yeah, like, because they both just right at the average, so, like, putting them in is more really just like population within the school, but it doesn't really push it up or down.
What was the feeling with regard to scenario 25?
That's us. Yeah, I mean, that, again, I think there's enough pros and cons that I wouldn't like solely pick that one, but it is in my top 3.
Yeah.
I think so.
My top 3.
I could sell 25.
Something else I looked at, not that it has to be discussion, but I want people to say, but something else I looked at also is, and I realize it's not necessarily family level info, but I looked at how, when I looked at transportation, I looked at, say, for 26, it's like, there's one school that's gonna have to start taking a bus that didn't have to take a bus, and there's one school that doesn't have to take a bus anymore. And so it was like, it changed schools, but it was like the same amount of people
Change.
taking the bus, same amount of change. And I looked at that, as well. So like 24, there would be 2 new schools having to take a bus that never had to take a bus before. 25 only had one actually, like one, I think it was one having to travel that didn't have to travel. 26 was an even swap. 27 had, I don't remember, I think it was 3 had to take 3 new people and single, 3 new for people, 7 people had to take a bus, and 1 set no longer. So I also looked at how much of that kind of impact.
So what are the thoughts about 27?
It's in my top.
I actually like that one a lot. The math and English scores are within 10 for each. And the population is good.
And when you look at the average, it's like, well, some of it's a little below average, but nothing is strongly below average. Like everything else has a strongly below average, and 27 is the only one where nothing is more than 4 points below average. Which,
The pro about that is it has like the best school.
But it creates a big school.
We create a big school, yeah.
but it's not that big of a school, like really.
Well, that will probably mean, like different, it will need more staff for Myers if this is what. we're-
Myers has over 700 right now.
Yeah, but it would be compared to the other two, is what I'm saying.
The biggest size
Well,
spread.
Yeah. Which of these schools could handle a larger than typical school?
None, no. None.
My daughter has to come down to the bottom floor, on the 3rd floor at Hackett to get to her locker. Every day.
So so here's the thing, Myers and Hackett, as they stand right now, can hold a little bit more than North Albany, but once North Albany, once we finish that renovation, North Albany will be right at that 650 mark. And Myers and Hackett, where they are, the facility is a little bit larger than, 650.
Okay. I would just like to see all students in the 6th grade on the 3rd floor have a locker there. And I'd like to see all students in the 7th grade have a locker on their floor. And right now, my daughter is going 4 floors to get to her locker. I'm sure that's my wife telling me something. So she's watching.
Well, I mean, if you dig into 27, you could pull Dual or Delaware out of Myers, one of them, and you could stick it at North Albany, and it evens the population. And it might, and it can kind of.
I rated 27 the weakest on my parent logic framework. The most number of situations where a parent would be like, you're gonna send my kid over there? And I noted this difference in size between the schools was the biggest, although as you said, you can sort of continue to play with that.
It does,
Go ahead.
it does present, it does present a problem to have, from that perspective, have Ash go across town.
You're gonna see how it's kind of.
And Arbor Hill go across town to Myers. Although it's I don't know, it may or may not be a problem. I can see both.
I can as well. I also wrote down that Hackett ended up the weakest score-wise on both English and math. And I was like, I kind of like it if you're gonna have the weakest one on the ALA over here and the weakest one on math over there, as opposed to become both of the same school. To me, though, to those, I had a list of pros and cons for each one, that one had more cons than any others. So that was why I crossed 27 off the list.
Which one?
I looked on my little list of criteria, I gave 27 more cons. That was my one that I would eliminate.
You said give it more cons.
Yeah, more cons.
Compared to pros.
You said 27 was your lowest.
That was my lowest. But I love all the different, everybody makes good points.
North Albany increases from 13 to 29 in English. Hackett increases 10 points in English.
I have a question that would further add to these different scenarios. We had talked about last time after we got it narrowed down a little, the possibility of the district giving us a sense of the things you know that maybe we don't know about the different elementary schools. And like, if we say, look at scenario 24 with Harvard Hill, DCX, Montessori, and Smiler, like at Norfolk, and you consider things like the general culture, and I don't even mean like racial culture, just like the general culture and the different challenges these schools have, and the kinds of families that are in those
One of the things
schools.
I'm gonna say is that with any of these scenarios, even if you go 24 through 28, the culture of the school is going to change because it's moving around quite a few of the elementary schools as to where they go.
Yeah.
And so that culture is going to change to some extent. And so we could share some things as well. But I'd like to also get it narrowed down. And one of the things that I'm thinking is, once we narrow down in the next few minutes, the top 3 or top 4 that you'd like to look at, then we would send out the information to you by scenario and then in a Google form. And then you can type in what your individual pros are and cons are. And then we as a district, I can have staff look at that. And then if there are things that we can add to that, we can add to that.
That's what
But we'll add it in the same format that you were working with so that it's, that clear delineation of these are the pros, not that one is better or worse, but here are the pros, here are the cons. And then we can look at what that information looks like before we start doing the focus groups or parent input groups or forums, whatever we call it.
So
Yeah, I would like that. I'd like to hear from you.
sorry about that. So, parent input groups. Okay, so we're gonna make our recommendation to the board of like, let's say 3. And then we're gonna go to the parent input groups. And so the board hasn't made a decision yet?
No,
They're gonna wanna hear from the parents.
of course.
Okay.
And some of those parent forums, you have to remember, we have how many elementary schools and middle schools?
All right.
Probably not gonna get all of them done between now and the next board meeting, but we probably need to get started on some of them a little bit, maybe have 1 or 2 test runs before we present to the board. Then after that, get more information, because we did say that we would like to go back to the board a couple of times because we want to get their input as well and have that authentic discussion. Does that sound like a plan?
Yeah.
I think that point that you just made is gonna be so important, that they had a parent forum, that parents have this perception, I want my kid to go to blank, I don't want my kid, I don't want my kids to go, we're Myers, what's going on in mine, I don't want my kid, whatever, everybody has their opinions, and they're all wrapped up emotionally, and their perceptions of the schools, which, but the schools aren't gonna be the schools anymore, what they perceive to be the schools are not gonna be the same, because you take this group of kids from this school and you put them all over here, it's a whole different school now.
And I don't think we'll be able to get away
Parents
from
of that.
that potential emotional reaction, which is why I like the idea of what you were saying, which is attempting to focus on like, what's important to you? What are your values? What are you looking for? That's what we want to hear. Like, sure, I give you other thoughts,
Sure.
but, and I just here, I like, the reason I'm on my phone, I'm not trying to be rude, I just thought I would like randomly text my three friends, and I was like, what matters to you most if you were trying to change middle schools? Like, and I have friends who I know, like, their kids are in 5th grade, or the people that I talked to informally, but I haven't asked them. So I was like, on the spot, right now, I'll explain why later. Tell me like your top 2 things that matter to you most, because I was kind of curious if I did an informal poll and I only got 1 answer. So,
But here's the thing that we could do. We could have the survey go out while we're developing pros and cons, and then that survey information is part of the overall presentation, even though this is the criteria that the committee used. Here's, based on this criteria, here's the survey data that says, we thought transportation would be the number 1 thing, but transportation, based on the survey, was the least thing. And I'm just saying that randomly. Get that information based on the criteria that the committee has looked at, see what those most important things are. We embed that in that presentation, talk about the pros and cons, and then have that discussion through the forums, and then get that authentic feedback during the forums.
And I like the idea of having the survey out before the forums, because some people will have filled out the survey, some people will not. have filled
And
out
it could
the
even be
survey.
available that night too.
Yeah, but then you get, it'll help generate the conversation, because there are some people who are gonna be like, well, I'm gonna wait for the forum before I fill out the survey, and some are gonna be like, I feel very strongly, and I'm gonna fill out the form, but it'll help focus again on what are your values.
And I'd love a survey to have some specific scenarios. You know, the closest middle school to your house is 1.3 miles away. Would you prefer your child to go to the closest middle school to your house, which is gonna be, you're going to get your child there, or they're gonna walk there, or would you rather have your child bus to a school that's much farther away?
That's a very vast
Actually, that's what
question.
I'm
Yeah,
wondering.
I should absolutely go on.
And some people, but that's not their situation, but hearing lots of people answer that question and recognizing you want to bike and you want your kids to bike.
Oh, yeah.
And then it's like, let my kid have a nice, warm, safe bus. You know, and I hear, and those are both valid, different perspectives.
Yeah.
So here's what we can do as far as next steps. We have, and I have no problem changing it, but my tallies show 25, 26, and 27.
You're narrowing it down to those three?
Unless there's something else.
I put 28 first, and I think Dan put 28.
You said what?
So that's the funny thing. On 28 came out either our number one or our last choice.
Yeah.
We've got two people who thought it was our first choice, and I think three who said it was their last choice.
And we exclude.
So what I looked at were 3 check marks or more. And the ones that received 3 check marks or more, 25, 26, and 27. If we want to do 28, we can. If you want to put 24 in it, we can.
I don't think we answered that question about 24.
24?
Yeah.
There was one
Did ask it.
X, but nobody else chimed in to say yay or nay.
24 would be my second choice.
I mean, I think it would be, if I was doing 3 or 4, I think it would be my 2.
So 24 would be one of your top 3?
So should we
Should we just all name our top 3 and maybe there's one that's just left out?
Okay,
Or,
I'm fine either way.
or if you just got out the number, yeah. and-
Okay.
and say like-
All right, wait, take off Dual, because I changed so much of this. This is just like a.
go back to tab, the first tab?
Sorry, just the first tab. Wait. All right.
So this is
like
the one that
thumbs
we're
up,
looking at,
thumbs
right?
down.
Yeah, everybody's on this one?
No, we're looking, that's not the one.
Yeah, that's the second page of it, but that's the first page. This is what it actually does to the school. That's just about how far it is to the average. So to me, this is more like I'd pick on those
That's the
colors.
second tab, right?
This is the first tab. We're holding the second tab.
So we're looking at the page that looks like this, one, which is the one that's on this thing.
No.
No? So which one are you all making a decision
I'm
based on
making
this
a
one?
decision on
Well,
the-
no, they match. The alignments are the same. I'm just saying what you're holding is that second tab and the numbers are all,
Right there,
but.
okay.
Yeah.
So,
Or you gonna name our top 3, or you're gonna read them one at a time and raise our hand, you get 3 votes, you get 3 hands.
you get 3.
Or do you want your top 3 in each category? I mean, it's
No,
Excel, you
each
can
category,
track it.
overall, because you're gonna do your pros and your cons.
Please, I love to, I'm fine with that.
Okay, so 24 is in the top 3.
Okay, 24 is my top 3.
Okay. 25 in the top 3. 26 in the top 3.
26 and 7 and 8.
27 in the top 3.
I get my votes.
Wait, 27 in the top 3, loud and proud.
I'm thinking.
Okay. Hold on,
I'm thinking about 27.
Well, population is high enough.
Although the one thing you could say about 27 and 28 is you could just split DCS and dual. It's not, you don't even really have to do the math of it. Just take 20 kids and stick them. It's like it all works out.
I'm behind
Aren't
God.
they necessary, but aren't they already?
Yeah, but
separated?
they're-
Dual and DCS are
Is
separate.
Yeah, building?
It's part of, but it can be split out. So let's start over. Let's start over.
Oh, I'm very building, okay.
You have 3 votes, because it's your top.
Yeah.
24, top 3.
Oh. Yeah, we went up.
25, top 3.
Why are you moaning?
26, top 3. Okay. 27, top 3. 28,
Me too, 27.
27,
I can believe it.
and 28, top 3.
Please tell us if you can.
Oh, wait, hold on, 'cause this is,
That's a different,
that's different.
yeah, this is like,
This is why I'm confused, because this 28 doesn't align with this 28. This 28 has Ash and Meyer and Montessori in the same school. This one doesn't.
Yeah, there's.
Ash, where?
See 28?
Well, hopefully I'm voting on this. I'm
So
voting on what I thought, when I looked at, that we were even.
Is one the dual scenario?
No, I don't have any dual scenario.
What does one have dual, one doesn't?
So where we are right now, when we look at this, is you have 4 that have 3 votes or more, 24, 25, 26, and 27. "24, 25, 26, and 27. They have 3 votes or more. 28 had 2 votes. So what we can do, I mean, and if you want us to do 28, you can do 28, you can look at it again. It's fine. Because we were, I mean, this is where we were the last time, and I understand that there's different pros and cons. And maybe you just need to see it in terms of pros and cons listed out versus just, conversation, and that's fine. But from here, I guess I will ask this question. Even though 24, 25, 26, and 27 all have 3 or more votes, do you want to see 28 in pros and cons? Do you want to be able to list the pros and cons for 28 or no?
I think 20. I mean, maybe just if everyone would make a case for their favorite one, like we named, but just in making the case for 20, it gives everyone busing, or 28, like it gives everyone busing, and it has, to me, it has the smallest variance. Like the English is the only one where all of them are above 20, and to me, the math scores are always 12 apart. Like I could almost never build a school.
Yeah.
So like saying that the math scores are far apart, it's like, yeah, but New Scotland has weird scores that are 50-20, which I don't actually think represents New Scotland much. So like, I don't know. I'm just curious why everyone hates 28 so much. Because I thought it was like, yeah.
I can tell you why I don't like the 28. I had been, from the beginning, I thought that every magnet school should go to 1.
That was one of my reasons.
The map at North Albany.
That's not the- That's not the only reason.
Why do you think that? I guess I think it's interesting, but like to say, it's like we're gonna create a lot more disruption to do it. Just seems.
What were some of the reasons? I didn't tell you what I liked about it, but I'm happy to
Sarah?
Go ahead, you said you had more reasons why you didn't like it.
So again, I'm admitting I'm basing this on just my own perception of things, but putting New Scotland in the same school at Griffin and Schuyler and no other middle or higher achieving school helping balance that out, that's gonna be, and busing all the New Scotland kids to the other side of town. That's gonna be a significant culture shock for New Scotland kids.
Why would 24 be different?
I have no problem, like, if my kid were still at New Scotland, I have no problem sending my kids to North Albany. But I would have a problem with some of these, you're busing them and they're going to this other, it's like, there's a totally different cultural
I
environment.
guess, but verse 24, it's like, okay, in 28, New Scotland's about half the school still. In 24, you'd have Montessori be like less than a quarter of the school. So I would count that as like a way bigger hit on the kid than I would count 28 as, Like you're talking cultural shock.
But I'm also taking this academically, I'm thinking what the amount of support the school would have to provide, like the staff. would have
If
to-
New Scotland is more percentage of the student body, it's better for the school. If Montessori is gonna be a quarter of the student body in 24 versus the equivalent New Scotland is gonna be about half the student body, I think the challenges of 24 are greater.
I can see that.
Let's have like 24, under 24 is Arborville, DCS, Montessori, and Skylar. And North Albany.
Say that again?
DCS is like Skylar when you look at the grades. Montessori, and DCS is like,
24.
So is there any objection to showing 24, 25, 24 through 28 in a pro-con format, and you enter in your information, and then we look at that?
No, that's right.
Okay. So we will look at 24 through 28, okay? We see where we fall. 24 had 4 people who ranked it in their top 3, 25 had 3, 26 had 4 people, and 27 had 3, and 28 had 2,
You said 26.
okay? I'm sorry,
You said 26, that's
26 had 4,
4 and 27.
27 had 3, and 28 had 2.
Can we create a Google Doc or Google Sheet and let us input, so that
Absolutely.
That's what you're.
there are 28 pros, cons, we can now collectively dump our pros and our cons in there.
We'll load it in and we'll share it out, and then that way you can see the comments and you can do the pros and the cons. The rationale, the summaries, will be this information, so you can see that. And then that way, when we come back together, we'll be ready to talk about them. And if there's no narrowing, there's no narrowing, then it's shared out in that format. And I think that's something that, if you want to, especially for that first go around with conversation, maybe this is where we are until we have more conversation and parent input to see what those next steps would be.
And are there other action steps we can take at the same time to keep things moving along, like the survey, or developing, or preparing it, or sending it out, or starting to schedule forums? I mean, is it?
I would say let's get the materials ready to go, because otherwise
Okay.
what are we sharing out and what format is that? Because what you do want to make sure is that there is a consistent message even
Yeah.
among yourselves
Yeah.
as that information goes out. And so we'd look, probably within the next week, we'd have everything ready to go. The Google Doc should be ready shortly. That shouldn't take more than a few days to do. And then that way you can start getting your information and putting that in. We can also start working on the survey, Mr. Lesko. And what we can do with the survey is take the criteria that you have already used and have families rank, and then have another spot where they can freeform put in what their items would be.
Any of the ladies listening in, did they have are any of those representing schools and have a vote if I chance?
That's all staff, and yes, they will have input. If they have any comments, Ms. McKenna, Ms. Bridgewater, I know Ms. Bridgewater did send me a text, and I was trying to watch my phone, and her comment was basically what we talked about, concerned that there wasn't enough input from families with regard to what they are thinking. So, yeah.
What about the other schools? I mean, some of the people at the other schools haven't been showing up. Can we be more active, can you be more active in trying to get them here?
We have been very active in trying to get more people here, but I think at this juncture,
Yeah.
it needs to go out for public discussion.
Yeah.
It really does. It really does.
I just don't know if those schools are being represented at this point.
Every school, as much as we have tried to get every school represented,
Yeah.
the work of the committee has to move forward. And then what we will do is, as we do the parent forums, that community will have that opportunity
Yeah.
to be heard.
Okay, no, that sounds good.
The opportunity to have a forum will still be offered.
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
And then we'll work on that and we can get that information out to you.
What schools are represented?
Every school,
No, I'm not.
Here. Eagle Point.
I know every school is represented
Yeah.
in general, but like who's here, like my original school was in Scotland and now I'm at Packet now.
Yeah, you go for it.
Monsoor,
Marshall.
And mine,
Myers, Hatchet.
they have me listed as DCS, but I'm now dual.
Okay.
So, that leads us to, we need to decide on our next formal meeting. Do we want to do 2 weeks?
Yeah.
Okay,
I think so.
and what is tonight? Tuesday? Is tonight Tuesday?
That's Tuesday.
My days blend together. I am not joking. So Tuesday, the 23rd.
What, so it would be, our next meeting would be to,
Discuss the total.
To final, well, just to review the final information. Because the next board meeting is actually, and I did reserve space, but if we are not ready, then we're not ready for the 18th. Or do we want to try and meet on the 30th? Because that is Thanksgiving week. Do we want to try and push it to the 30th?
I think it could be there.
I actually,
23rd? Say that again?
I can't the 30.
I think the 23rd is fine for everybody.
Is there anyone who can't do
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
I know, I'm trying. Well, I'm having off, but I'll be at parent teacher conference.
Oh, yeah.
So we can do the 23rd?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And then our next board meeting after that is on
Second.
December 2nd. And so even between the 23rd and the 2nd, we may be able to get in a few parent forums at that time because we can get the survey out pretty quickly. And then between, even though it won't be the week of the 23rd, we may be able to get on the 29th or the 30th or the 1st, we may be able to have 1 or 2 parent forums just to kind of get our feet wet with what parents are saying.
So the 23rd is at 6 to 7:30, right?
Yes,
I can only do one.
Yeah.
And then you said December 2nd, so we would be at the December 2nd.
December 2nd board meeting.
What time is that, 67:30 or something?
It starts at 6:30,
I feel bad for you guys.
so we will, we'll have to look at where it is placed on the agenda.
That's a Thursday.
Yeah,
Yes.
Can I send somebody to take my place for that meeting?
Yes.
Oh, no. For my daughter.
You said, so what's, like, if I were to swap out my day, what time's like the potential start time?
For the board meeting?
Yeah.
6:30.
6:30, okay. And then it can, who knows how long it'll go.
I would say probably, I have to look at the agenda, so right now, let's just say 6:30, and then once we do agenda setting, I'll review that and look at what time the committee would be sharing out its information.
Well,
Okay. All right, so next meeting is on the 23rd at 6 o'clock. Same place. All right, thank you all so very much. Lots of progress. Awesome, awesome. Thank you, thank you.